Vedic knowledge means, I'll explain this very briefly. That in India, for thousands of years, knowledge has been taught on the basis of scriptures, Sanskrit scriptures, which are known as the Vedas. This word Veda in Sanskrit simply means knowledge, but it actually means a higher order of knowledge than our human level of knowledge. We, human beings, know things through our senses and through our minds. And these senses and minds are not very perfect platforms of knowledge. Therefore, we see the knowledge that is taught in institutions such as this, universities, modern education, that knowledge is always changing, it's always being revised, because it's understood it's not perfect. And so, science, for example, if we were to compare what was taught in science courses in universities 100 years ago with what is taught today, we would find a very big difference. In fact, the science taught 100 years ago would probably sound very peculiar to us. There would be very funny things that we find funny and dismiss, that's ridiculous. But 100 years ago, that was very serious. And people had to study and pass examinations on that knowledge, that version of science. Now we have our up-to-date version that is taught today, but we should not be so arrogant as to presume that in 100 years from now, there won't also be a very different form of science, and the people of that time will look back at us and say, boy, they were really ignorant. Now, I'm not saying that scientific knowledge is necessarily advancing at all. At least we can say it's changing. And that is the nature of things in this world. They always change, but also over time it seems things basically remain the same also. We're always faced with the same basic problems. In spite of all the advertisement of progress in science and medicine and so on and so forth, the death rate for human beings is still 100%. Everybody has to die sooner or later. And everyone still gets diseased, although many diseases that were very severe in the past we've now found cures for them. There are new diseases which are also very, very severe, deadly, and we're scrambling to find treatments for those. So death, disease, old age, everyone still gets old. And then birth or rebirth. Because in the Vedic context, the soul is eternal. And so we don't take birth only once. In fact, we can be pretty sure from the Vedic perspective that we have been born many, many millions of times, not only in human forms. There are, of course, the lower than human forms that we know, animal life, plant life. They're also higher than human forms in other planets and other dimensions of this universe. And so the Veda describes the eternal soul, or souls, there are uncountable souls, as revolving through a wheel which is called chakra, samsara chakra, wheel of birth and death. So the Vedas are a vast, vast encyclopedia of revealed knowledge. As I said, this is knowledge coming not from the human level of understanding, but from the transcendental level. And this knowledge encompasses everything we know about this universe and even more. All departments of knowledge are covered in the Vedas. It's so vast, however. There are so many Vedic texts, So many teachings. And then the question comes, what is the final point of it? What does it mean for us in the end? And so that is the specific subject of Vedanta. Anta means end or conclusion. Veda. Veda are these sacred texts, the Vedic knowledge. So Veda Anta, the conclusion, the point of this Vedic knowledge, the essence of it. And this point, this essence, this conclusion is aimed at liberating the soul. Again, the soul is what we really are, the very seat of consciousness, the very essence of the self. That is spiritual, is not material. But now we are caught, as I said, in this samsara chakra. Being born again and again, dying again and again, growing old again and again, becoming diseased again and again. And striving in different ways to become happy. But whatever happiness we may achieve in life, that is temporary. So the Vedanta is aimed at moksha. Moksha means liberation. Freeing the soul from birth and death, bringing the soul up into its own glorious state of eternal existence. Of course, we already are eternal, but the problem is we don't know that, we don't realize that. Our consciousness is absorbed in temporary matter. So I want to talk to you today about the system of psychology or the philosophy of mind that is taught in Vedanta. People are very interested in psychology because psychology is holding forth the hope that we may be able to solve some of our deep problems that we have. Of course, there are many, many schools of psychology in the West, but one of the very prominent schools, or now it's probably more accurate to say there's a number of schools, but they go back to one great figure, Carl Gustav Jung, who was, I think, the first, or at least one of the very first important disciples of Freud. But he broke away from Freud early in his career. He actually thought that Sigmund Freud was too materialistic. Sigmund Freud thought actually that the mind was simply a product of the functions of the body. So dealing with mental problems for Freud was very much a physical matter. Everything he traced down to very, shall we say, even crude physical instincts. So Jung thought that this is too earthy, too mundane. And so he charted out a new course of psychology, but actually it wasn't really so new because the sources that he drew from in constructing his idea, or his philosophy of the mind, were also very ancient sources. And among these ancient sources were the Vedas. In fact, Jung was a great student of yoga and the presentation of the mind that is given in the yoga system. So I'm just telling you this so that you know that there is actually a great background to psychology. I'm talking about psychology, but this is not something that started only 150 years ago. It has a very, very great historical background and leads us away, actually, from Western European ideas to ancient cultures of the world. And I'm going to be particularly speaking about India and the Vedanta. So in the psychology that comes from Freud, a particular branch of it called depth psychology. And they give us, these depth psychologists give us an image of the mind which is very interesting. They compare the mind to an iceberg. So as I think you know, an iceberg is a great chunk of ice. They can be very, very huge. I mentioned yesterday, a few years ago, I heard in the news about an iceberg that broke off of the Antarctic ice shelf. And it was moving free in the ocean, and everyone was quite worried because this iceberg above the water was as big as the country Belgium. Now what that means is that below the water there was 8 times more. The mass of ice was 8 times greater than that which was visible on the surface, which was already quite big as Belgium. So this is the idea that what we know in depth psychology, what we know to be the mind, that stage of our thoughts, our thinking, and our perceptions of the world, and all of that, everything, the things that we know filed away in the memory, all of that is only a fraction of the total mind or total identity. Most of our conscious self is submerged, and that is called the subconscious. So Vedanta has much to say about this, that most of our self, our identity, is merged in a state which is in Sanskrit called tamas or tamoguna, which translates, my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada has translated this term tamoguna as the mode of ignorance, or tamas, ignorance, darkness. So that means our soul, our spirit self, is mostly in darkness about its own existence. And we are operating in a very small portion of our conscious potential. You see? So there is so much more to discover about ourselves. But a method is required. A method that will shed light into that dark region of our consciousness. And this method is still in Western psychology not known. In Western psychology, of course, there's therapies like talk therapy. You can talk about your problems. And sometimes they use hypnosis. But they only scratch the surface. Actually, full self-realization, full realization of who we are, means to perceive, not just to believe or to think or to hope, but actually directly perceive that I myself am not material. I am also not even mental. Taking material to mean physical matter, the stuff of this body. Well, I, the self, am not that. And I'm not even the mind. The mind, again, what we call the mind, the surface awareness, is only a little subtle screening room in which a little bit of our consciousness is played out. So that is also not ourself. So full self-realization means actually spiritual realization. Realizing myself as actually birthless and deathless. So in the Vedanta system of psychology, there's a very interesting example. That of the moon, the full moon seen at night over the surface of a lake or an ocean. You have many lakes in Finland, so you can picture this in your mind. A full moon night, a clear night, no clouds in the sky. The moon is in the sky. And you're standing next to the edge of a lake, a big lake. And so you can see the reflection of the moon in the water of the lake. But that reflection is not steady because the waters of the lake are always moving. So when you look at the reflection, everything is always, the moon seems to be breaking up all the time. But we know it's a reflection, so that doesn't bother us. If we want to see the full steady moon, we just look up into the sky. So this analogy is given to help us to understand that what we think of now as ourself is that reflection. We're looking at our consciousness as reflected in matter. And what is matter? This is a very interesting point. What is matter? What is this? You see, it's a very mysterious thing, this matter, actually. I'm just going to shift for a few minutes, or a few, not even minutes, just a few moments. I just want to shift into Western brain science, which has some interesting things to tell us about our experience of matter. Because ordinarily, I mean, we all just take what we experience to be just as it is. That we're sitting inside this room, and this room is made of, definite concrete material. It's really there, and it's hard, and it's heavy, and so on and so forth. And we can go out of the room, and out of the building into a whole great world. But the modern brain science and neuroscience tells us that everything we see, for example, this room that we're seeing with our eyes right now, actually that experience is back here. There's a visual cortex in the brain, which is actually the very back of the brain. And it's like a little private cinema that we all have back there. And the scientists think that what's being played out there are just some electrical impulses in this one part of the brain. And somehow we're experiencing these impulses back here as this room. So in fact, we're not really seeing this room. We can't be sure. Therefore, there's a modern philosophical puzzle. How do you know that you're not a brain in a jar? How do you know that you're not actually just a brain that's being kept in a laboratory inside of a jar, and there are electrodes plugged into the appropriate nerve centers, and impulses are being fed in, and you're experiencing what you see and what you hear inside that jar? I think you've all probably seen the film series Matrix, and that's pretty much the storyline of that series of films. That what we think this world is not at all what it really is. So modern neuroscience actually brings us to such a type of speculation that maybe this is just something we're experiencing inside of our brain and nothing more. You see, he said. So for everything, the sight, the visual cortex that's back here, there's for smell somewhere, feeling, hearing, tasting, all of that are various nerve centers in the brain. And the interesting thing is that the brain is locked up inside the skull. That's an absolutely dark place. You see? So here we're seeing light. Are we? Because if that experience of seeing is actually inside the brain, there's no light in the brain. So that means we're not really seeing light. So what are we seeing? That we don't know. But this is the mystery. You see, this is the mystery of matter. What is matter? We just assume that it is something out here, real, in front of us. But when you get into careful introspective thinking with the help of modern science even, it all becomes a big question mark, what this world is and what we're experiencing. So Vedanta says that what we're experiencing is that reflection. You see, we're not on the level of our own self-experience, but our consciousness, because consciousness can be focused in different ways. So our consciousness is now focused in a realm which Vedanta calls Maya, illusion. So we're at this identification, that we identify our life with this particular body, with this particular place. This is the place where I live my life. That is all illusion. In actual fact, we are our real self is like the moon in the sky, transcendental, above the lake, above the ever-changing flux of this material world. So, how is it? The question is, how is it then that we have come into this situation? That our consciousness is focused into illusion, into thinking that I am this body, when in fact this body is just an assembly of bones and blood and fat, and it's covered over with skin with hair growing out of it. The body is a place of suffering. The body is a place of death. And yet we willingly accept this as myself. So, how it has come to be also goes back to the nature of the soul, the nature of the self, the spirit self. As spiritual beings, what we really require is what in Sanskrit is known as ananda. Like the Vedanta Sutra, one of the great Vedanta scriptures, Ananda Maya Bhyasa. So Ananda in Sanskrit means happiness, bliss. So as spiritual beings, we are bliss-seeking. We want to be happy. And so we become attracted to this material world, this world of appearance only, this illusion. Because there's a promise here of happiness. I mean, that's being advertised everywhere. You see, happiness. Smoke this cigarette, you'll become happy. Drink this liquor, you'll become happy. Drive this car, you'll become happy. Wear these clothes, you'll become happy. Eat this or that kind of foods will make you happy. It will give you pleasure. And this is what drives people onward. This need for happiness. It is also known as rasa. Rasa means taste. So we have in the very depth of our nature, it's not a want actually, it's more of a need, a necessity. Therefore in Sanskrit there's a word prayojan, necessity. We need this. But the problem is that we are looking in the wrong place. We're looking in a kind of reflection. Again, referring back to the moon above the lake, we're looking in a reflection for that happiness. So this is how it has come that we have entered into this realm of illusion, thirsting for happiness. So the Vedanta philosophy and psychology is teaching that the happiness that we really want, or that we really need to become satisfied, must have the same nature as our own self, as our spiritual self. If we are eternal, if I am eternal, then the happiness that is suitable for me must also be eternal. It cannot end. But unfortunately, this is the case with all so-called happy situations in this material world. They all come to an end. In fact, the Bhagavad Gita teaches that sukh, in Sanskrit means happiness, is always followed by dukh, misery. In fact, these two are in a very insidious way, they work together. You see? Just like in old age, old age, one looks back at one's youth and yearns for those days in one poem, the days of wine and roses, the days of youthful happiness, carefree, no tomorrow, just enjoy, enjoy, enjoy. Oh, those were the days. There was a song I remember, those were the days, my friend. We thought they'd never end, but they do end. And then those very same happinesses that we were enjoying as young people, when we're old, we look back upon them, and they become sources of melancholy, of dissatisfaction. Oh, I wish I was young again. You see? So even the experience of happiness becomes a misery. And so that's why in the Vedanta literature, this material happiness, this temporary happiness, is all classified as dukkha, ultimately. Dukkha means suffering. So, in this world of Maya, there's only the promise or a temptation of happiness, but the promise is not delivered. And yet here we are, requiring bliss, requiring ananda, requiring satisfaction. So that is to be found on the transcendental platform, on the spiritual platform. And this is the whole key. I spoke to you about self-realization. Fully realizing ourselves as spiritual beings. This is the key. The key is that we simply have to find a way to experience that higher happiness, that transcendental happiness. And that experience will then shake us out of this sleep of Maya, this illusion, because that is actually what is going on. The soul, our real self, is in a kind of sleeping state. When we go to sleep at night, that means our waking consciousness becomes submerged even deeper in ignorance. You see? We're already in ignorance. But when we sleep at night, the ignorance even becomes more. And we have dreams, and these dreams we consider they're not real. So from the spiritual point of view, right now, this waking state is also a dream. So the best way to get roused out of a lazy sleeping state is when someone calls to you, telling you that if you get up now, there'll be something very, very pleasurable, very happy here for you. Someone may be sleeping, but if mother comes to the bedroom door and says, "Dear, I just cooked your favorite breakfast. Please get up now." So then one is inspired. Oh, yes. For enjoyment, I'll get up. Otherwise, let me sleep. But if it's something that's going to make me happy, then I'll get up. So this is what we need. We need real happiness, not this temporary, illusory happiness. We need happiness that is of the same nature as the soul, eternal. And so when one can gain this experience of ananda, then naturally the soul comes up out of this tamas, this ignorance that has covered us for many, many thousands and millions of births. So how to attain, how do we actually experience then that spiritual happiness? So in the system of Vedanta philosophy and practice, therefore, spiritual sound, mantra, is so very, very important. A mantra, what does this word mean? It's composed of two root words, manas and trayate. So manas means the mind or the consciousness, and trayate means to free, to deliver. So mantra is a sound that pulls us out of this ignorance. And this sound being a spiritual sound, is, shall we say, electrified with this ananda, electrified with this spiritual bliss. So the mantra that we were chanting just a few moments ago, the Hare Krishna mantra, which is a simple mantra found in the Upanishads, particularly Kali Santrana Upanishad. It's a very simple mantra consisting of only 3 words, Hare, Krishna and Rama. And they're arranged in a certain pattern. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this mantra is termed the Maha Mantra, the great mantra, because this particular mantra is infused, is saturated with unlimited ananda. Because, why is that? Because it addresses directly the Anandamaya Purush. Anandamaya Purush means that being, that Purush, that spiritual being, spiritual personality, who is the source of all happiness. Ananda. All happiness has its source in this being. And that being is Krishna. And therefore the name Krishna means all attractive. So Krishna, yes, Krishna corresponds to that word we use in Western languages, God. But in the Western world, people think of God, tend to think God more of, as a kind of ruler, autocrat, master, controller, the greatest being. And that is, it's not that these notions of God are wrong, but the essence of God nature, the essence of Godness, is actually Ananda. This is how God is defined in Vedanta. Anandamaya. There's another word in Sanskrit, Jyotirmaya. That's a description of the sun. Jyoti means light. So light pours out of the sun endlessly. The light floods the whole sky, streaming out, illuminating our whole world. So similarly, Anandamaya means that from this being, Krishna, bliss, happiness, transcendental happiness, eternal happiness, is pouring forth in endless streams. What we must do is come in contact with that being. And making contact is very easy. It is accomplished by Shravanam Kirtan, hearing and chanting this Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So what I have explained to you is not to be left just on the shelf of belief. Oh, Swamiji has told us some interesting things that he believes. I'm not sure if I believe. No, actually what I presented to you is not something you may believe in or not believe, but it's something you can test yourself. Therefore we dare to call Krishna consciousness a science. In this sense, we don't mean science, laboratory science, test tubes, and that kind of science, but what we mean is that a science is something that can be experimented with. You see, science is making claims also. Science is also expecting us to invest belief in what science says. But people tend to believe science more. Why? Because science can show us experiments that seem to prove its claims. Like, for example, here, we have a bottle of water. Everyone knows what water is. It's a clear liquid. It's necessary for our life in this body. We have to drink water. But science says this water is composed of 2 gases. The famous formula H2O, 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. Now we breathe oxygen and hydrogen when we take breaths. So we look at this water. That's quite a big leap of faith. I'm looking at this liquid and I'm feeling it's quite heavy. You see, it's not at all like a gas. I wouldn't breathe this, because if I did, I would drown. But science is saying that actually water is two gases that you can breathe combined. And then it becomes this liquid which you cannot breathe. That's quite a big leap of faith, isn't it? Now, if science had not discovered this at all, let's say here now, 2004, this year, still no one knew what water is made of. And someone came up to you on the street and said, water is composed of two gases. You can breathe those two gases, but you can't breathe water. You probably shake your head, this guy's nuts. What's he talking about? It's composed of two gases. That is completely outside of my experience. But we believe it. We believe it. Everyone in this room believes that water is made of hydrogen and oxygen. Why? Because science says there's a test. You can go into the laboratory, you can run an electrical current through this. Actually, it's the other way, I think. You run electrical current through hydrogen and oxygen, and it creates condensation, water droplets. Because the electricity causes the hydrogen and oxygen to fuse together, and that forms water. Now, I doubt it. I seriously doubt if anyone in this room has actually themselves done this test. But you all believe it. Because science is a great hallowed institution. The priests of science are very respected. There's Saint Einstein and Saint Darwin and all these saints that we bow down to and pray to. Please keep the blessings of technology coming so that our society will become more and more push button. We can do everything just by pushing buttons, or maybe put electrodes to our head and just think what we want. Computer, turn on, and we'll turn on. You see, this is the promise. So we all have faith in this. And again, because science has some proof in the form of experiments. So this Hare Krishna Mahamantra, the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, is the means to unlock the treasure of eternal spiritual bliss. This is something you can test. And we test it every day. That's why we are Hare Krishna people. You see, we didn't come to this planet from some other planet, a flying saucer. We were born here in this, most of these devotees here are, I think everyone except me, is from your country, Finland, and they grew up here in this country. Their background is just the same as yours. But why are they dressed as they are dressed, with the tilak mark on their forehead, the beads around the neck, and living this very different life? Because they're experiencing something. They're experiencing this happiness that I am talking about. And the experience is coming by the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So, this is ultimately what this Vedanta psychology is bringing us to. A method, in Sanskrit vidhi, a method by which we can raise our consciousness out of the ignorance of accepting this world of appearances, accepting it as the only reality. We can raise our consciousness out of that and come into the realm of pure transcendental bliss, which we call Krishna consciousness. So, I just wanted to speak very brief introduction on these topics. And we have some time for questions that you might have. I also would like to point out that we have brought books with us. If you are interested to read more about this, we have a nice library in the Finnish language, translated into Finnish, Sanskrit texts translated, that will give you much more information than I'm able to give in a brief talk. But what I have said in these few moments may have aroused some doubts or some questions in your mind. So please, if you have any questions, ask them now. I'll try to answer them. Yes?
Joo, totta kai. No niin, eli kiitos näistä sanoista. Oli paljon hyvää ajateltavaa. Jostain pidin ja jostain en. Ja sitten kuitenkin tuli jotain ajatuksia, mitä hiukan laittelin ylös tässä, kun luin, että mikä esimerkiksi tekee tästä Krishna-viitteestä mistään muusta uskonnosta tai lahkosta poikkeavan, koska minun oma mielipide on, että ihminen ei tarvitse mitään erityisyhteisöä eikä mitään erityisliikettä toimijakseen tai ollakseen hengellinen tai uskoakseen Jumalaan. Ja sitten aika lujana Jungin asiantuntijana ja tulevana psykologina niin voin sanoa, että Jung vaikutti ihmisten ja tieteen piirissä. Ei suinkaan tiedettä vastaan.
Odotatko hetki, niin käännetään. Menee muuta liian.
So first, she wanted to thank for your speech. There were many things that she liked and some things she didn't. And her question is that what makes this Krishna consciousness movement different from other religions or sects? She says that we don't necessarily need some church or some organization to believe in God and be a spiritual person. And then she's commenting, because she's a student of psychology, about Jung, that he was doing his work amongst people and science, and he wasn't opposing science.
Joo, eli kuten tässäkin nyt tänä iltana kuulimme heidän vastaisia kommentteja. Ja sitten oman mielipiteen vielä tähän lopuksi, että minun mielestäni vain toimimalla maailmassa, sen keskellä, sen ehdoilla ja tiivisti maailman kanssa voi tuoda henkistä valoa ihmisille. Ja ihminen voi myös iloita maailmasta asioista, kuten myös surusta, osana elämänsuunnitelmaa, koska surut kuuluvat ihmisen elämään, mutta kun me tiedostamme nämä asiat, voimme olla henkisiä ja kirkkaasti ymmärtäviä ja meidän ei tarvitse kieltäytyä. Kiitos.
I didn't follow everything where she said so many things, but she said that one should work in this world and in that way help people progress in their lives. And then one can be also happy in this world, because also the sadness is something that one can be happy about.
Then she mentioned that one should not, no need of belonging to any society in order to make
I said that.
Well, the first question is, what is the difference between this Krishna consciousness movement and other sects or religions? So, if you take sect or religion, and that was formulated in the question, as just being a system of belief, and this is all you care to understand about religions, it's just something that is believed and that's it, then you won't be able to see any difference. But that's your point of view. You see? We have a system, a process of realization. Realization means to make real. This is something more than just believing, but it's a way of actually perceiving. And this is taught. How to do this is taught, for example, in Bhagavad Gita, Pratyashabhagamam Dharmam in Sanskrit. To understand this by direct perception, the spiritual truth. And this is what the yoga system, the system of yoga, is intended to do. There are different kinds of yoga, but all of them are aimed at realization. Yoga is not a belief system. Yoga is also not simply a gymnastic system either. But yoga is a system of realization. But to understand how it works, then one has to practice it. You see, just like science also. Science is not simply something to believe in, but it is offering a method, a practice, a technique. And then when you follow this, then you are supposed to realize what science is teaching. This was the point I gave. This was the point I intended when I gave this example of water. Science tells us things that also seem fantastic, according to just our sense perception. But there's a method of proving this by experiment. Water is made of two gases. Now, you can choose to accept the method or not. You can choose, if you just want to say, well, science is just another religion. And there are some people who say that, actually. There's some people who make, I think, sometimes they make very good arguments. Science is just another religion. It's ultimately just a big belief system. Then you can say, yes, this is just a belief too, that water is two parts, is a combination of two gases. And you can choose to reject it. I don't believe it. You can do that. You're free to do that. But then that means that you also are not in a position to really say how science works. You see, if you just want to relegate science to a belief, it's just a belief system. They're saying so many things, but who knows if they're true? Then you're not really in a position to say how science works, because you have put yourself outside of that. So if you want to say that Krishna consciousness is just a belief, you're free to say that. But that doesn't mean that you know how Krishna consciousness works as an internal system. You cannot presume to have that knowledge just by dismissing it. Yes, this is what you've done. You've just dismissed it. You just put it in a pigeonhole. This Krishna consciousness, I put it in the category of belief system. Close the door. Click. Finished. Okay, you can do that. But that doesn't mean that you know Krishna consciousness as I know it by practice. This is the point I'm trying to make. Just like there are islands in the Pacific where I don't know now if these people are still there with this belief system, but there used to be, as late as World War II, there were people who lived on these islands, and when they would see airplanes flying overhead, or see ships, the Navy ships at sea, they considered them to be gods. And then they would make, out of wood and coconut leaves and so on, they would make little statues of airplanes and ships and soldiers they would see. And they would worship them. These are gods. So these people thought they had understood what airplanes are and what ships are. They thought that they had, understood everything about them. They're gods and we worship them. But obviously the person flying in the airplane will have a different thing to say about them. He's inside the airplane. So if you say, oh, this is a god, he'll say, wait a minute, this is a machine, I'm the pilot. He has a different experience from within.
I have one question. Can I ask?
Yes?
Okay. So if you repeat the mantra, praising Krishna, that mantra, then you have got some kind of feel, right? happiness or something, some kind of feeling. And on what basis do you say that after the behind the feeling there's some kind of transcendent reality, or especially how do you know that it's Krishna you're talking about? How can you prove that?
Why shouldn't it be?
That doesn't prove. You are saying that it's...
Well, I'm not trying to prove anything to you.
Yeah,
by speaking.
If I start to do the mantra, then I get some kind of feeling.
But you're not.
But if...
No, you're just speaking hypothetically.
No.
I can speak hypothetically too about anything. And I can make up some, hypothetical explanation for anything.
So can I... what kind of difference is in the feeling than in other feelings of some kind of religious feelings and big?
How do you know that there's a difference between religion? Have you yourself had religious feelings, religious experiences?
Yes, I have religious feelings, or mystical experience.
Mystical experience. So that means you have, do you believe in them as valid? Or are you in doubt?
I can say that I can identify that feeling. I can prove any kind of link between the feeling and in some kind of God, because there's nothing that I can say the feeling tells me about some kind of God that is defined in some way.
Or what if the feeling is Allah or Buddha or
Well, you
God
see,
or Jesus,
yes.
or
So in that question, you're assuming that there's a difference between Allah and Buddha. That's your assumption.
No, I'm not thinking that. I'm just saying the difference.
I
We can think differently. We all don't have to think about Krishna, or we can just think what we personally feel still.
Yes, but how do you know that that's the same as what I'm doing?
No, I can't. But my point is that we all
Yes,
don't have
well,
to think
my point is that you're free to do whatever you want
yeah,
in that
I
regard.
understand.
So you are free to come here and sit and listen to what I say.
But it can be lie.
It could be.
Yeah, it can be.
Yes, it could be a lie. It could be a lie, such a lie that we're so deluded that we don't find happiness in smoking cigarettes or drinking liquor or illicit sex life. We live a very strict moral, and this could all just be because of a lie. I'm sure you